very, very warm welcome to St Peter Mancroft Church here in the heart of Norwich. My name's Edward Carter, I'm the vicar here, and every Wednesday at 1 o'clock we have a short reflection offered, which is also live streamed on our YouTube channel. In fact, I think there must be well over 200 of those reflections on our YouTube channel now, so if you wanted to look back at any of them, then do feel free to do that. But it's lovely to see any of you here in the building now. If you're enjoying looking around the church, just visiting, then do please carry on. But if you want to just stop and listen to a few thoughts that I'm going to offer now, then that would be wonderful as well. Well, back at the house where I live, we have a thing called a timer switch. It's one of those little switches you can attach to the socket where you plug in a lamp, and it makes the lamp, let's say, come on and off at certain times of day. And it's particularly useful with a lamp because, as the evenings draw in, the light will come on by itself automatically. And that's exactly why we have one back at home at mine. But at this time of year, it does need quite regular tweaking and adjusting. It doesn't seem to come on when we want it suddenly. And so we have to fiddle around and change the setting, and then it comes on again, but then seems like only a few days later you still need to tweak it some more. And in fact, this Sunday just gone was what's called the autumn equinox. It's the moment, in sort of technical terms, when the centre of the sun crosses the equator of the earth. And what that really means is that day and night are pretty much equal in length when you get to the equinox. And in the northern hemisphere, where I'm speaking from today, in Norwich, in England, in the northern hemisphere, this is the time of year when the days are shortening, of course. The autumn equinox is when the days get shorter and shorter. And in fact, at the equinox, they get shorter at their most rapid rate. I looked it up, and each day, just at the moment, is 4 minutes shorter in terms of daylight than the one before. 4 minutes doesn't sound much, but if you add up a week of 4 minutes, that's pretty much half an hour of less daylight in just a week. No wonder I have to keep attending to my timer switch so much just at the moment. And the reason for the equinox is, of course, all to do with the relationship between the Earth, planet Earth on which we live, and the sun. It's an amazingly finely tuned thing, that relationship, which gives rise to the equinoxes, which gives rise to the seasons, of course, as well. And it seems that the Earth is at a very special distance from the sun as well. The relationship of the Earth to the sun is very finely calibrated. It's in what's called sometimes the Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold. Not referring this time to porridge, but referring to the temperature of this planet Earth on which we live. It's just the right temperature for water to be basically liquid, except if it's very cold at the poles. It's just the right temperature in the end for life as we know it. But there are other interesting things about not just the Earth and the sun, but about the solar system, this part of the universe in which we live. I didn't really realize this, but I was told the other day that those great big planets, Jupiter and Saturn, are perfectly placed to act as kind of cosmic vacuum cleaners. Loads of debris comes in to the solar system, asteroids, all sorts of quite dangerous things if they hit the Earth. But Jupiter and Saturn between them suck up nearly all of that debris as it comes in. Isn't that perfect that they just happen to be there in the right place? And then the other thing that's very interesting, well, there are lots of interesting things, but another very interesting thing about the Earth is the moon that it has. Now, a lot of planets do have moons, but our moon is quite big relative to the size of the Earth. And again, it's just in the right kind of orbit so that it stabilizes the rotation of the Earth. It gives us, of course, the tides, all sorts of other things, which make the Earth, well, more prone, more ready for the emergence of life again. Well, now, certain people have puzzled away at this and indeed have discovered all sorts of other really interesting, extraordinary things about the Earth and its place in the solar system, in the galaxy, in the universe. which make it really seem very special and unusual indeed. As I keep saying, perfect for life, for us. It's deeply improbable, we're told, that any of this or all of this together could have come about. It would be a bit like sitting down with a die, a 1 to 6 die, or even a pair of dice. But if you had just had one and you rolled it again and again and again and again, and you kept rolling a 6 without fail, it's that kind of improbable. Well, whenever I do that, rolling a die, it certainly doesn't come up 6 every time. Of course, you get a whole mixture of numbers, even if you might get a couple of 6s in a row. But it seems that it's so improbable that Earth is just perfectly finely tuned in the way that it is, that it would be rather like rolling 6s continuously for hours, for days. It's pretty much a mathematical impossibility. So this was a question in my mind as I wondered how one might respond to this seemingly very interesting, extraordinary fact. However, it's important to remember that science and astronomy, modern astronomy especially, tells us increasingly how vast the universe is. It is simply enormous. We live in a galaxy, as perhaps I'm sure you know, the Milky Way, which is amazing in its own right. It has apparently, although I can't imagine anyone's actually counted them, more than 100 billion stars. That's an awful lot of stars. The Sun, our star, is just one of those 100 billion. That's in the Milky Way galaxy. How many galaxies are there, you might be wondering? Well, again, I can't imagine anyone's managed to count them accurately, but we're told that it could be at least 1,000 billion galaxies. I can't imagine to even think about what that number is. If there are that many galaxies, and the Milky Way is just one of them, and there are 100 billion stars just in the Milky Way, well, there are an awful lot of stars. So many that it's almost beyond imagining. So I suppose sitting down and rolling all those 6s in a row somewhere, if you took into account all of those stars, might actually be, well, still unlikely, but possible, even probable that it might happen somewhere. Perhaps it just happens to be us, to be here, to be Earth. Well, I'm not really a scientist, so I can't comment on all of that with any great accuracy anyway, although I'm very interested in it. But of course, there is famously another possibility, and that's the idea of a guiding hand, an outside designer. It's one of the classic arguments for a God who kind of sets things in motion, based also on the fact that the world, the universe indeed, doesn't really look completely random. It looks as though it has some kind of purpose behind it. And this was an incredibly popular argument when it first came about. It had existed in earlier forms, but with the rise of science, and particularly in the 18th century, it became a very strong and prominent kind of argument that Christians, that theologians proposed. The argument that it must be God who explains these things that otherwise seem to be impossible, the things that science cannot account for. But there is a problem with this argument, because what it's really saying, if you think about it, and as many have commented, it's sort of saying, well, we need God to fill in the gaps of our knowledge, the gaps, the bits that science can't really explain. And the challenge is that science explains more and more each year that goes by, each decade, each century. Science explains more and more, and I have friends who are scientists, and they are wonderful, inquisitive people. They're finding out more and more about this world, this universe in which we live. To put it another way, the gaps get smaller and smaller. The God of the gaps gets squeezed out in the end. I mean, one example would be, an early example, rainbows. Beautiful things in the sky. And of course, if you go back thousands of years, people didn't understand how on earth a rainbow could come about. So they said, well, it must be something to do with God. We can't explain it otherwise. But now, and certainly for 200 or 300 years, we've known that rainbows are a perfectly explainable scientific phenomenon. They exist because of the way light meets water droplets up in the atmosphere. The light is refracted and scattered. It makes a beautiful rainbow. But science can explain this perfectly well. So that particular opportunity for God has dropped out of the picture. And in the end, perhaps, there would be no gaps left at all if we just allowed God to occupy them. In the end, our knowledge, our understanding would grow more and more, perhaps. So, is this a problem? Should I give up my Christian faith? Should I worry about whether God exists? And I have to say, for me, it's not a problem at all, any of this. In fact, almost the opposite. Because for me as a Christian, I certainly don't believe in a God who only is posited or who exists to explain things that I can't otherwise understand. I don't want to believe in a God of the gaps, a God who just is wheeled out when everything else has failed, when all else has failed. It's almost, as I say, the opposite for me. For me, God is connected much more to the awesome wonder and beauty of creation, of this world, of all of the universe, which is always present in every place. Indeed, for me, God is connected much more to the experience in every moment of my life of simply being alive and experiencing this wonderful world in which we live and all the life within it. I'm certainly grateful to science for explaining how a rainbow is made. But my spiritual dimension, if you like, well, that leads me to be awestruck as I begin to ponder falteringly why, not how it exists, but why it exists. Why is it so beautiful? Why is it here? Why am I here to perceive it and enjoy it? For me, as a Christian, the glory of God is woven profoundly into this earth, into all of creation. And particularly for me and my Christian faith, it's something to do with the person of Jesus Christ as well. He is the glory of God with us, truly human, somehow bringing truly divine into being with us as well. And so my response is really, by God's grace, to have an uplifting and all-encompassing sense of God with us, of life and of love. So instead of the God of the gaps, my faith is of and in a God without any gaps. That's my Christian faith. A God with no gaps. A God who is always with me, always woven into every aspect of life and of creation. And I suppose, as you've listened all this while to me, my hope is that that might be something that you can reach for and know and share as well. Thank you so much for listening to my few thoughts, our weekly reflection every Wednesday. Next week, one of my colleagues will be here to give their reflection as well. Maybe if you're here in the building or indeed joining online, you'd like to join again for that. Well, thank you again for listening today. Thank you.